Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. The Austrian Grand Prix weekend is underway and it's Sergio Perez stealing the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Max Verstappen with his 4th pole position in a row. Sergio Perez with his 4th failure to make Q3 in a row. What's going on here? He was deeply frustrated with the stewards, the way they were dealing with the track limits. Should he just stop making all these mistakes though? And also, what does it mean for his future in this Red Bull seat? Is this one of the nails in the coffin? That means he's not going to be in that car next season. Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. It was confirmed before the day began that Sergio Perez had a cold yesterday. Seemed to be okay today because his pace was pretty good and we'll get into that, but he just couldn't put it all together. Liam Lawson though would have been his replacement if that had happened because Ricciardo is not there in Austria at the moment, but certainly we could wonder whether one of these two guys might be his full-time replacement at some point in the near future, and there's even rumours going around that effectively Nick de Vries has 4 more races. He has until the summer break to look good, or they're going to put Liam Lawson in the car instead. So that's the situation, and de Vries responded to these with, you know, some absolute fire on the track, putting it P20. In fairness, he was only like 8 tenths off P1. That's just how competitive the grid is at the moment, but de Vries did end up P20. We'll get into that. There was also this coming out of the Red Bull camp that Toro Rosso as a brand will not be returning to the Alfa Tauri car. Instead of calling it Toro Rosso again like they used to, they're going to probably partner with some other brand because, I mean, they can get more money doing that, can't they? So that's probably what they're going to do. Franz Tost says, I don't think it's going to be called Toro Rosso. I think there's another possibility to get even more money out of it by partnering with somebody else. And that's probably what Red Bull are going to be up to. Just to quickly mention here, this is what was going on earlier in the day in practice. Verstappen was P1 on the mediums. I will say the most interesting thing about this session was the long run data coming out of the top teams, because the Ferrari does look better. I mean, they were good around here last year, like, don't get me wrong, but their upgrades do look like they're starting to work now. The long run data though was very interesting because the Red Bull, despite being the fastest over a single lap, was actually not as quick as the Mercedes on the long run data. Now it's incredibly difficult to say here, what are the fuel loads? The fuel loads on this are definitely different between the Merc and the Red Bull. Maybe the Red Bulls here were running on full race fuel, whereas the Mercedes are running on, let's just say, sprint fuel or something, because there was a roundabout. I mean, Russell was averaging a 109.8, Hamilton was averaging a 110.4, Verstappen was a second behind Russell, as was Perez, with almost identical average lap times. So there's obviously some difference in fuel weight there, but nonetheless, Red Bull were actually slower, even potentially taking that into account, than Mercedes in the long runs. And this was actually the issue for Red Bull last year, right? That they were quick in quali. Verstappen put it on pole last year, but couldn't maintain that in the race itself. Now, the issue with having a sprint is that tomorrow we're going to find out what Sunday's going to look like. Is Verstappen going to drive away with tomorrow's sprint race, or again, are there issues potentially that they were having in FP1 before they seem to get the car in even a better window come qualifying, going to return, or are they just going to win? Because if Verstappen wins tomorrow, he's going to win on Sunday, you know what I mean? Like, that's just how it's going to be. Of course, qualifying could be different tomorrow, could throw out some different results, but that was probably the most interesting thing from practice, that the long run data did indicate that Red Bull can be got at this weekend. But maybe they got their car in a stellar window from qualifying and beyond, and Ted Kravitz did mention in the pit lane that Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz feel like this current version of the Ferrari is as good as it's felt in a long time. So the upgrades do certainly seem to be working. They looked pretty good today. And there was also this from Christian Horner, who said that he's looking forward to seeing whether the extremely competitive pace of Daniel Ricciardo, he seems to have found his mojo. He's been working hard in the simulator. He's extremely competitive. So they're doing some tests, I think, after Silverstone, and this all aligns very well with Perez having another absolute stinker. So it started off with Bottas having a bit of a spin. Fair play to Bottas because he managed to actually get out of this qualifying one session. It was very competitive. I mean, the entire field was separated by, I think, about 8 tenths of a second. De Vries was P20 by 8 tenths to Verstappen. So, I mean, it was all over the place, to be honest. This so competitive. I mean, look at this. Norris in P6 is 5 tenths down, and down to P12, it's all in the same tenth. Like, that's what happens at Austria, but also the field is just very competitive right now behind the Red Bull, really. But the Ferraris have at times, and have again now, challenged the Red Bull very closely, but only one Red Bull, because one Red Bull is not starting at Sunday's race from the front of the grid. And this, just to confirm, is the qualifying for Sunday's Grand Prix now, rather than for tomorrow's sprint race. The sprint race is now an entirely separate occasion, and there's a separate sprint qualifying shootout, if you guys haven't heard about this, that will be going on tomorrow before the sprint race itself. Now, going into Q2, the track limits were starting to appear. Now, Perez was pretty competitive with Verstappen. Verstappen probably had a couple title tenths in hands. But Perez was pretty good. He was very competitive, but he put in a couple of laps, and well, after the first lap, I think both of them got their lap time deleted after the first lap. And it was like, all right, what are you playing at, lads? Just put in a solid banker. Verstappen went again, put in a fine lap, and, you know, it was good enough for P1, I think, but he had definitely something in reserve. Perez put in a lap, looked okay, but actually he was outside of track limits. And this is what he did on turn 9. So it's really turn 9 and 10 where the drivers tend to go over the white line. And it's because, like, the further you can get onto this curb, the more you can open up the track so you can carry more speed through the corner. It just is a sensible thing to do, but it does mean, and last year there were so many issues with track limits, right? And we had it again. Perez, though, for some reason, he would come through turn 9, and then going into turn 10, would try and turn even more left to open up the corner even more for the right-hander. But there was one occasion, I think it was his second lap, he turned left on this curb and went out of the track limits. He'd made the corner, no problem, and had his right-hand tyres on the line, but then he, like, literally drove off the track to try and extend the corner a bit more. So that was a major mistake. So then he only had one chance, right? Verstappen was on the radio saying it's a joke, they're deleting all our times and stuff. And there is a debate to be had about this, right? Are they exercising this in the right way with regard to track limits here? Because last year it was a mess, this year it's a mess. They don't have any laser analysis to tell you whether a car is out or not. So the team, the stewards, look at the footage and they say he's out, he's in, and they make that decision probably 30, 45 seconds after the car's gone around the track. It's a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. Now, look, the drivers could just drive within the limit and then they would be fine. Of course, they want to push for every single extra hundredth of a second because look how competitive it was here at the end of Q2. But still, you've got to call the track limits at some point. I mean, there's got to be a track limit somewhere. So, I mean, maybe there's not. Maybe you just let them go wherever they want, but that's probably not the best way to do it. So I don't mind what they do. I just wish that there was like a Hawkeye type thing, like in tennis or something, and it could tell you immediately a second after they've gone through that corner whether they were in or out. But while they probably do have the money if they wanted to make that happen, it's, you know, they don't have the facilities for that here at this circuit, and maybe there's an argument to say that for certain tracks, such as this one, it might well be a necessity. But Perez, on his third lap, so this is an absolute shambles for him, to be honest. Like, he comes through turn 9, no problem, and then turn 10, gets a bit of dirty air from the car in front, understeers off the road. So 3 laps, all you've got to do is put in a solid lap here, and it was good enough, again, like a 104.9 or something. It was easily good enough. And if he'd just taken, I mean, we saw some on boards with Alonso and with, I think, Hamilton and others, where they would only have half their car off the track here. Like, you can lose, okay, you might lose half a tenth over the course of those couple of corners if you don't push it to the limit. You make sure you get through to Q3, but he bottled it. He went off the track, and, I mean, look, he got a bit dirty air from the Williams, but nonetheless, you can't make those mistakes. 3 laps in a row. 3 attempts there from Sergio Perez, and he got it wrong all 3 times at the final couple of corners. It just is an embarrassment at this point, and that leaves him P15. And also, there was another few laps that got deleted, and that left Albon at P10. What a drive from him today. And the other British driver, Lando, Norris, I mean, absolutely, we know Norris is great around Austria, but wow, what a performance from Norris today, especially, and those new McLaren upgrades looking rather nice, it's got to be said. Now, yes, Norris had the issues in Spain. He had a great quali there, then it fell away from him. But today it looked a lot more competitive, and more competitive even than the Mercedes. Russell falls out as well, but look how close this was, right? Russell was 4 tenths back. Hamilton was, 2 tenths back, and that was enough. So Perez would have been fine, but he bottled it. I mean, there's no other way to look at it here. Russell, Ocon, Piastri, Bottas, Perez out, and that leaves Perez as out of qualifying in Q2 or Q3, again, for the 4th race in a row. He says, like, what a joke with these track limits. But, I mean, look, it's not the stewards that are the joke here, right? Because fundamentally, everyone has the same situation. So it's got to be said, a complete disaster, right? Starting P15 on Sunday, and tomorrow in the sprint might be better, but on Sunday, he's going to be P15. Like, an absolute disaster again. And this is the first time since 2008, can you believe, that Red Bull have missed out on Q3 with one car for the 4th consecutive race in a row. Perez has been P20, P11, P12, and now P15. It's an absolute disaster. And in those 4 races, Verstappen has been on pole every time. I mean, there's just nothing more to say at this point. Perez is actually quite quick. When he put in a decent lap, he wasn't far off Max. He might have been good enough for maybe the 2nd row today. Just nowhere near good enough, right? And people, compared Perez to Bottas as the partner to Verstappen that Bottas was to Hamilton. But during his stint with Mercedes, Bottas, as far as I'm concerned, was definitely a great driver. This guy made Q3 101 consecutive consecutive times and made Q3 every single time with Mercedes. Like, he never missed a Q3. He was always there. He was always putting in a lap good enough to get through to Q3, and he did that weekend in, weekend out forever for Mercedes. And it's very impressive, right? Looking at what Perez is up to today as the second driver. So, yeah, man, what does this mean for Perez? Because I don't think this is the nail in the coffin for his career in Red Bull, but I don't think he's going to be in this seat next season, right? I mean, mistakes like they saw today, especially with how competitive it is just not going to cut it, especially when we don't know if Verstappen's going to drive off into the sunset on Sunday. The long run pace indicated that we might have more of a race on our hands, and Perez is going to be nowhere near to help him out and to defend and be as a team, whereas he's going to have the two Ferraris right behind him, because Leclerc and Sainz put at P2, P3. We've seen this before. We actually saw this in the practice session as well, where it was these three, I think in this order possibly as well. And Leclerc did a monster final sector. I think he was even still down on Verstappen in the final sector by a little bit, but he was absolutely committed on those final two corners. Turn 9, turn 10, the most committed I saw any driver there all day, right on the limit, and tried to get all the lap time he could. Just half a tenth in the end down on Verstappen's lap, and that might just have been straight line speed on the first couple of parts of the track. But Sainz in P3, what a lap from Norris as well. 2.5 tenths down on Max for P4, just ahead of Hamilton P5, then Stroll, Alonso, Hülkenberg, Gasly and Albon. And also I've got to say as well, another nice stat for you guys, that Hülkenberg, Norris, Ocon, and possibly Piastri as well, and maybe even a couple of other drivers, are now 5-4 in their favour against Sergio Perez. Like, the funniest one is probably Hülkenberg versus Perez is 5-4 in Hülkenberg's favour in qualifying, which is, yeah, it's not ideal. So I don't know what you guys think about this. Interesting qualifying session for sure, and it was more competitive in the end than I thought it might be, so hopefully we still have a good weekend on our hands. But yeah, Perez on Sunday is not going to be much of a factor, we could imagine. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.